The Seeking Justice podcast crew acknowledge the First Nations peoples of Australia, specifically the Yuggera and Turrbal peoples of Meanjin and Brisbane, the traditional custodians of the lands on which we live and work. We acknowledge that their sovereignty was never ceded. We pay our respects to their ancestors, their descendants, their elders past, present and emerging who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country. We also acknowledge the need for all of us to reclaim our own indigeneities from the lands from whence we came. Welcome to the Seeking Justice podcast. I have a very excellent guest I'm excited to introduce from the wonderful state of Tasmania, Peter George, who is the independent member for the division of Franklin in the upcoming, independent candidate, I should say, soon to be the independent member for the division of Franklin, another campaign for the Franklin. Undoubtedly. Peter was a former ABC foreign correspondent, in fact, the first Middle East correspondent for the ABC, and a Four Corners reporter. And he is the community independent for the upcoming federal election for the division of Franklin, which is currently held by the Labor MP Julie Collins, who's the Fisheries Minister, amongst other things. Peter was a founding member and is president of the Neighbours of Fish Farming, NOF, who has, in a David and Goliath battle, taken on the behemoth Tasmanian salmon industry with all of its fishy corruption and other things, which we will talk about. And, NOF is a community-based organisation. And I met Peter when I travelled to Tasmania at the beginning of last year to attend the wonderful Cygnet Folk Festival with the family, but also to do some litigation investigations into potentials for what was going down in the state of Tasmania with regards to salmon. And our mutual friend Greg Barnes SC introduced us. So, Peter, how are you going?
Well, I'm still standing, both metaphorically standing as a candidate and still standing on my hind legs. Look, I was a reporter on the steps of Parliament House when Gough Whitlam was sacked. I covered a lot of the Whitlam years and Fraser years as a political reporter. And I always thought in those days, we are talking about the 70s, and I used to think in those days it was great to be a federal political reporter, but God knows who would want to be on the inside looking out.
Yes.
And here I am all these years later. It's exhausting. It's exhilarating. You get an amazing amount of abuse, but you also get an incredible amount of loyalty and trust placed in you. So how am I going? You never ask the candidate that, because one day they think they're a total disaster. The next day they think they're a complete winner. I'm somewhere between total disaster and complete winner.
Excellent. And as you should be, it's a bit of a bipolar roller coaster, isn't it, running? I certainly remember the exhaustion when I ran in Dixon against Peter Dutton in the 2019 election, which was meant to be a 6-week campaign that I signed up for, but because Peter knifed Malcolm and Scott knifed both of them, it turned into a 10-month odyssey, unfortunately, and it was very yes, I needed a lot of cowering in fetal position in Hawaii after that to what do you call it? Detox from Twitter, actually. Yeah,
well, I'll take advice on where to go.
Yes. Well, you're in a beautiful island state at the moment, notwithstanding some of the dodgy practices we're going to be talking about, which I want to get to soon. But I also, that's fascinating in terms of your history covering federal politics. And just incidentally, I recently saw, and I wrote to the Prime Minister on behalf of a couple of young professionals I've been in contact with in Gaza about, offering visa pathways and whatnot. But one of the things I was amazed to find out about our former Prime Minister Bob Hawke. I never realised that he was involved in a public disagreement with then UK Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher about imposing sanctions via the Commonwealth Heads of Government on apartheid South Africa. Were you aware of that?
No, well, I was sort of course, I was much more aware of Malcolm Fraser's very strong view
Yes.
as head of the Commonwealth. I was also very aware of Margaret Thatcher's determination that there shouldn't be sanctions against the apartheid regime. But no, I do confess I wasn't so aware. I mean, I was much more well aware of Hawke's policy towards the Middle East, which is where I was based at the time during his tenure.
And how did you become the first Middle East correspondent at the ABC? Is that right?
It was just a conversation. The ABC had covered the Middle East, weirdly, from London, as it covered Africa from London for a long period of time. And in 81, I think it was 81 and 82, I ended up spending a large amount of time doing a lot of stories out of the Middle East. And I complained to my chief correspondent, Ian McIntosh, at the time and said, I might as well be bloody well based here. I'm spending such a long time away from home. He said, that's a good idea. And within 12 days, the ABC had made a decision that there was going to be a Middle East bureau, and that was me. So I started off doing a lot of work out of Beirut, but with all there was a lot of kidnapping going on at the time.
Yes.
And when we realized that I was probably the last sort of correspondent based there who was clearly Anglo.
Wow.
And started feeling a little bit exposed. I mean, I had always worked on the idea that Australian passport would help me because we were seen as a very friendly nation back in those days. They were after the French, they were after the Americans, they were after the Brits. So anyway, we ended up deciding that we'd move to Cyprus, which allowed you to go very quickly to every Arab country directly, or to Islamic countries, and allowed you to go directly into Israel and the occupied territories. So, and the other great advantage of Cyprus is, one, it was full of spooks from just about every country in the world. It was a real sort of listening post. And secondly, no censorship. So you could fly out from any of those Arab or Israeli countries which had fairly strong censorship and file your material from there.
Amazing.
So there you go.
And
that's
how long?
History.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, I think Cyprus is still a bit of a listening post, isn't it, with the UK base there, and
it's got full of those golf balls and antenna and so on. I had a friend who was he's from the British High Commission. I used to introduce him to everybody saying, this is my friend Morris from MI5. And after about 2 years, he said, I wish you'd stop telling people what my job is. I thought it was a good joke.
Yeah. And so how long were you stationed over there?
About a decade, I suppose, somewhere around a decade. And then I made a very bad decision. My partner was a producer, and we got offered a job based in London with Channel 10, and she was going to be the producer, and I was going to be the reporter.
Right.
Now, working for commercial television, I earned, 10 times as much as I ever would have at the ABC, but I lost all credibility and personal sense of ethic, to be honest with you. So that didn't last for very long. I'm delighted to say I was sacked.
Oh, yeah. A badge of honour, no doubt.
It was a badge of honour.
And then did you move back to Australia?
Spent 3 years living in France, renovating an old house. We used to call it the house that 10 built.
Yeah,
because I'd been paid reasonably well. Then I did some work for various outlets, and then from France, and then was asked to come back for Foreign Correspondent.
Yep.
And from Foreign Correspondent, I spent a few years with Foreign Correspondent. Then was based in Geneva with my partner. Did freelancing. Came back to Four Corners.
Amazing.
Been all over the place. I was never really a full-time ABC employee. I was always on contract.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And how long were you at Four Corners, roughly?
Couple of years.
Yep. And were
Couple of
there
years. I fell in love with one of my editors.
As you do, yeah.
And we went sailing together.
Ah, did she do good, flattering edits of you? Was that part of the draw?
I was flying back from. I'd been filming for a few weeks in Iraq when Saddam Hussein was running the place, doing a piece that we called "I Saddam." It was sort of looking at who was Saddam, what and it'd been a very harassing, and it'd been pulled up a few times by the secret police, and difficult shoot in Iraq. And was flying back and called my executive producer from Singapore and said, "We're out, we're safe, we've got a good story." And he said, "I know it's going to be a hard shoot. I know it's been a hard shoot, Peter, but I'm going to give you an editor you'll love." And when we married,
literally,
when we married 10 years later, he sent me an email saying, "I know I said you love her, but I didn't mean it that way."
Too late.
I'm giving you probably far too much personal information here.
No. I mean, that's fascinating, having, such a worldly background. And I think just to contrast, and I am making assumptions a little bit here, but looking up the background of the incumbent, who was the president of Young Labor in 1996, member of the Australian Labor Party from 1988, seems to be a career politician. And I've always subscribed to the idea that what Parliament needs, Australian Parliament, all parliaments need, is much more depth of character and experience, and having that worldly experience, the wisdom, all of that, experience with different cultures in different areas of work and that kind of thing, I think is a great asset. Which is why you'd certainly have my vote if I was in Franklin.
Come on, Dad.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in fact, Brisbane's looking a lot like Tasmania today. It's very grey and a lot of rain.
How dare you? We've got a beautiful sunny day today. We've been out short sleeves, summer shirt.
Oh, look at that. Yeah, I'm unfairly stereotyping. It's true. So, going to the seat of Franklin, and I've just looked up that it was created via a redistribution of the division of Tasmania, in fact, in 1903. And, it talks about being a kind of marginal seat until Labor member Harry Quick was voted in for a number of years, and then he retired in 2007. And then, bizarrely, he didn't endorse his successor, the union official Kevin Harkins, but he said he was unsuitable, so he endorsed the Liberal candidate, and then he was kicked out of the Labor Party, and so Julie Collins was installed. And
it's a bit complicated because a redistribution provided cut Hobart, sort of gave Hobart Clark.
Yes,
which is where the sitting MP since 2010, I think it is, has been Andrew Wilkie, the Independent.
Yes,
very popular, very
war crimes whistleblower.
That's right. Very ethical, very straight up and down, straight shooter.
Yes.
So Franklin's a strange division because we've got the eastern shore of Hobart, which has got about 60%, 65% of the population of Franklin.
Yes.
So, and that's a very broad social, a broad spread of society there, from sort of Risdon Vale, which has always tended to be a bit of struggle street, but is in fact emerging as a place of choice to live. Bellerive, relatively wealthy areas down on the South Arm near the waterways, and then you cross the bridge, the Tasman Bridge, into Clark. So that's the eastern side. Then there's Clark, which is mostly Hobart, and then you go into the other part of Franklin. So it's actually divided in two, which gives you Kingston and Margate, which are sort of dormitory suburbs. But they also give you the Huon Valley, which is very much a sort of forested area with the beautiful Huon River and so on. And then we go across to the very iconic, I suppose, if I can use that term, Bruny Island.
Yes.
And Doncaster Channel. So it's quite a large electorate in Tasmanian terms. And it's a very diverse geographically and socially electorate.
Yeah. And I must say, there must be a significant amount of inspiration and hope and possibility from the fact that Andrew Wilkie has held Clark, and previously Denison as it was, for so long as an independent, showing that, Tasmanians have an appetite to move outside the uniparty system and actually get some substantive and meaningful change and input into federal politics. So that's excellent. I think I saw that there was a 7.3% swing against the Labor member at the 2022 election. So that trend certainly might keep moving in that direction, and especially after, we'll get to it, the latest controversy involving Anthony Albanese, or as the juice media call him, Anthony Salmonese, at the moment. Yes, and I've spent time in the Huon Valley down at the blockading now I forget the name, but visiting the
forest.
The Styx Valley when it was the Greenpeace had the Global Rescue Station there. I spent a couple of summers down there, including driving around in a bright pink Holden Ute, which confused a lot of the locals because they thought it was a cool. They thought it was a cool car, but they couldn't understand the colour scheme. And my friend had been an AFL footy player, so it was all a bit difficult to comprehend. And I lived in Tassie and worked for the Wilderness Society down there, and that. So it's definitely got a strong place in my heart. And reading Richard Flanagan's devastating book, Toxic, about the salmon industry, which I'd read when I first met you down there. So interested in what has inspired you to run for politics and why run as an independent.
Okay. I spent about 2 years looking for someone younger than me, preferably female because of gender balance in Parliament, who would stand, because I felt you have to seize the day. The Labor member has had a first preference vote of 37% or 36 and a bit percent at the last federal elections, which puts it into the category of vulnerable, if not marginal. And I felt that we needed to seize the day. And I had asked her, I think probably 2, 3, 4 times a year for the past 10 years to come and talk to my community about fish farming, which is because on the Huon River, that's sort of it and Storm Bay is fish farming central, for salmon farming central for Tasmania and therefore for Australia. And never once did she visit. And I thought that was disrespectful. And over Christmas, New Year, I sort of suddenly found myself, rather than dealing with this issue as I have done all the past 10 or 11 years, which is keeping everything at arm's length, looking at it like a journalist. Don't get involved. Don't get emotionally involved. I suddenly found, actually, I'm angry. This is disrespectful. And we're watching our waterways being trashed and no one else was putting up their hand. I thought, all right, it's a bit quixotic, but we've got to give it somebody's got to give it a go. No one else was giving it a go. Voices of Franklin had been looking for someone and we met. They immediately said, we would like you. I would never be a member of a party anyway, because that means you've got to follow the party line or the party whip. And, that's not the way that I would operate. I would want to deal with issue by issue as my conscience and my research is as a journalist, as a politician dictated. So I thought it was a bit quixotic because with Julie Collins on 36 and a bit percent, she was seen as being vulnerable, but nevertheless, there was certainly no way that I, as an independent, probably fairly fairly not very well known, would be liable to take her on, as first preferences. But Andrew Wilkie, who made a number of decisions, I had to reach a number of benchmarks, after which Andrew said he would consider endorsing me, and his endorsement is important.
Yes.
The last hurdle to cover was that Andrew would sit down and he would do the figures, and he would work out. And what Andrew feels is that if we get more votes than there's a fairly strong Greens vote down here, about 17%. If we can get more votes than the Greens, their preferences would probably flow to me.
Yep.
Between my preferences, between first preference and preferences from the Greens, there's a very good chance that we will get ahead of the official Liberal Party candidate and the renegade Liberal Party candidate. So there's a split vote on that side. Anyway, so Andrew came along and said to me, "I'll endorse you because I think you're going to end up in a preference battle with Labor." And you've already alluded to it. There are a lot of reasons why people here are liable to vote independent, and we might be able to peel away sufficient Labor and Liberal votes to be able to win on a preference battle. One indicator is that a year ago at the state elections, neither party was able to form a majority government because independents and Jackie Lambie network made it impossible for either party to be in government without supplying confidence. So there is a taste for independence down here, and I believe there is sufficient concern about the way that neither Liberal nor Labor federally are really representing voters' wishes. They've become divorced from the electorate. People down here feel like the dictates are coming down from Canberra, whether we like it or not. And there are a couple of major issues down here that make people feel that way. I can go through a whole lot of them. For instance, obviously housing, cost of living, renting, the collapsing health system, an education system that's turning out 50% of Tasmanians are functionally illiterate. All those are major issues, particularly hip pocket nerve and so on. But on top of that oddly enough, is this huge argument going on about the AFL Stadium. So in Tassie, the Tasmanian government did a backroom deal with the AFL to build a stadium that's going to cost about $1.5 billion. And for a state that's sort of half bankrupt already and with a collapsing health system, that's made a lot of people angry. The reason that there are others who support it is because the AFL said you cannot have an AFL team or an AFL women's team unless you have a $1.5 billion stadium. And they want to build it right in the bloody middle of town, right beside the water, where you've got this iconic view looking down Storm Bay, down the Derwent River into Storm Bay. And they're going to build this massive thing where people look in instead of looking out. So that's caused enormous controversy.
And where is that up to? Because when I was down there was a lot of, and that was over a year ago.
Benedict, it just goes on and on. Where is it up to? An independent economist, Gruen, well-known economist, has pointed out that it's a complete bloody waste of money.
Yes.
It'll cost far, far more than the government has said. And then the Tasmanian Commission charged with planning, the Tasmanian Planning Commission, looked at it and came in with an entirely negative review as well. But Labor and Liberal have teamed up to kind of ram it through Parliament as a sort of a state as a state development of significance. So they're trying to force it through the Parliament while hand in glove. In the same way that the other thing that has exploded in their faces is in the same way that Labor and Liberal are forcing through an expansion of the Atlantic salmon industry against the wishes of so many Tasmanians who have watched the marine life waterways be devastated by this industry, which one can only put down to the fact that there's it's run by three multinationals. Presumably, they are big donors, and they have an extremely well-paid lobby run by Lyle Howard, John Howard's nephew, and by Font Media, which is the largest lobbying company in Tasmania. And who knows what's happening behind closed doors. But
yeah,
those things are made. I mean, believe it or not, I mean, the stadium is not in my electorate.
Yes.
The electorate which I'm standing for. I better not call it mine yet. It's actually in the electorate of Andrew Wilkie, who's also against it.
Yes.
But nevertheless, I would say the most regular question that I'm asked when I'm at fairs and markets and out in public, probably the most regular question that I'm asked is, do I support the stadium or not?
Wow. So there's that much public outrage and opposition to it.
There's great antipathy amongst, particularly up north,
yes.
where there's a very strong backing for love of AFL up north, but it means the poor bastards up north are going to have to drive 3 hours south to Hobart, park their cars with their families, go and spend 2-3 hours in the stadium, and then drive home at night or pay $500 a night for accommodation. Where we actually have Bellreeve Park and a park up in Launceston. Between the two of them, we could spend a fraction of that amount of money, and improve those stadiums. I mean, the stadium is in the wrong place, and it's costing too much. And when you've got a housing crisis, my argument is we'd be much better off turning that into, you could get 1,000 dwelling units there. And if you worked it on the Scandinavian model, you'd have 1,000 units which would cater for all classes or levels of society, from the wealthy through to the people who are needing homes and so on. We could actually make an iconically Tasmanian, Australian beating social development down there, in the most beautiful, with parks and commerce and education and all the things you need to build a proper society, a proper community.
Yeah, and that could be a prototype then to roll out around the country.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately, there's just not that level of, even the most basic level of imagination or innovation in the uniparty. I was going to say the reason people probably feel like the dictates are handed down from Canberra is because they are. And I just think it's so unconscionable that the local member would not even turn up to talk to you people because of the sense of, I don't know, security, arrogance, entitlement.
Benedict, we wouldn't monster her. We're, civilized community. It's the lack of respect.
Yes.
And it's also, incumbency.
Yes.
Which allows you just to sort of shrug off what you don't want to deal with.
Well, Peter Dutton going down to his mega rich harbourside mansion where he wants to live, apparently at Kirribilli, and abandon his electorate. He'd prefer to be there than helping people during a cyclone. So it's unfortunate that happens. But this is why we need more change and fresh ideas flowing into Parliament. Getting to the salmon industry and especially recent developments, I understand that the aquaculture in Tasmania started in about the 1980s and fairly small scale, family-owned businesses, but has now become a multi-billion-dollar force. There was about 75,000 tonnes of Atlantic salmon produced in the 2022-2023 financial year. There have been huge scandals involving animal cruelty, involving environmental destruction, lack of oxygenation, massive fish kills. I mean, you can probably give a lot more information in that regard, but I just wanted to give a bit of an overview for you to respond to. As I understand it, according to the Tasmanian government, there are about 1,700 permanent staff in the industry. Now, in the past few years, those family businesses, which obviously became very wealthy, have been acquired by multinational interests, namely New Zealand's Sealord, Petuna, Canadian aquaculture giant Cook, which has taken over Tassal, and then JBS, who's taken over Huon Aquaculture. And JBS in particular has been marred by huge corruption scandals in Brazil. It's the biggest meat producer in the world. It has bought up most of the abattoirs on the east coast of Australia. It's been in battles with the Australian Tax Office regarding various tax risks. It's quite astounding when you read about it, and Four Corners, interestingly enough, exposed a lot of these, the takeovers in Australia being fueled by corruption and bribery. Both of the brothers that own the company have spent time in jail for insider trading. The parent company the parent company had to pay $256 million to settle a foreign bribery case in the US. They pledged to help save the Amazon rainforest, but have faced repeated accusations of sourcing cattle from illegally deforested land in Brazil, fined US $8 million over deforestation in 2017. Several supermarket chains in Britain have dropped products using beef from JBS in Brazil, but Coles in Australia has declined to comment, noting that the two big supermarket chains have been subjected to a complaint to the ACCC about stocking Tasmanian salmon and misleading and deceptive conduct. I guess it's no surprise in that regard. And as I understand it, and you can elaborate on this, but those companies are not publicly listed, so they're opaque and very difficult to get any records. But it is absolutely mind-blowing that Anthony Albanese has just rushed through this very crazy legislation to amend the EPBC Act, which was already a toothless tiger, to make it even more toothless. I know Independent Senator David Pocock has said that it could potentially now affect a lack of regulation of gas projects, fracking, drilling in sensitive marine zones. Even Leonardo DiCaprio has weighed in on it, which is quite amazing, but showing that this is an international issue, no doubt.
Did you see the other day that the Australian Hollywood star Jacob Elordi was on the red carpet in Melbourne and Sydney wearing the T-shirt with the logo on it that we started at Neighbours of Fish Farming, eating salmon, killing Tasmania.
Amazing.
Yeah.
How did you get these guys involved?
Well, the Jacob is the star of a brand new Amazon series, which is out in April, which is Narrow Road to the North, written by Tasmanian Booker Prize-winning author Richard Flanagan, and filmed by Justin Kurzel, the director, who's also a Tasmanian. So there were two Tasmanians on the red carpet with Jacob, and they told him about it. Jacob is, although he's a Hollywood, he's based over there. He's actually was born in Brisbane. And once they told him about it, he apparently said, "Yep, I'm with you guys." So we had the three of them standing on the red carpet with their
awesome.
eating salmon, killing Tasmania.
Amazing.
It was extraordinary.
And I mean, since I've read Richard Flanagan's Toxic and been down there, I have forsworn and boycotted Tasmanian salmon. Interestingly, I've noticed, though, in the big supermarkets, they've started stocking Norwegian salmon because they must be feeling effects. I mean, I just presume. But back to this, can you talk about this latest scandal with Albanese? I just find it perplexing, and I'm not saying, it's all, politics is always justified through jobs, and, not transitioning to renewables, jobs, notwithstanding there's many more jobs in moving to renewables and transitioning, etc. But 1,700 permanent staff, it's not insignificant. But for them to pull this federal legislative
stunt,
skullduggery, yes, stunt and skullduggery, it does seem to lean toward the what you were talking about, the lobby, and especially when this money's flowing straight out of Tasmania, like with our foreign gas exports, it all goes overseas. So, in fact, the Commonwealth is certainly not here, but over there.
Yeah. Look, the Labor was being wedged by the coalition because they were talking about jobs on the remote west coast of Tasmania. And of course, all jobs are important. They are vastly exaggerated. In the town of Strawn, the number of jobs that, according to the census from 2021, is 20 jobs. So we're not talking about enormous numbers of jobs by any means over on the west coast. However, the electorate over there, the electorate of Braddon, has got a retiring Liberal Party member. It is considered to be marginal, and both parties are vying to win that seat, in the same way that both parties are vying to win Lyons, which is held on a margin of something like 0.9 of a percentile, I think it is, or maybe it's 1.9, and also the seat of Bass, which is held by a reasonably thin margin also by the Liberals. So Tasmania is a battleground state, and it's always been a bit of a bellwether state. Tends to be that whichever way the state goes, so does the federal government. So in the end, this manipulation of the EPBC Act, in literally right up till midnight on the last sitting day of this parliament, both parties coalesced and joined each other in voting for a change of the act that is supposed to protect our nature, and it's all based on excising the industry from its obligations to look after nature and to look after a 60-million-year-old survivor from the dinosaurs, which is the Maugean skate, which now lives in Macquarie Harbour, its last habitat on Earth, and which numbers have diminished so much that scientists are saying, unless you move the salmon farms out of Macquarie Harbour, the results will be catastrophic. Now, the industry has squealed and lobbied because it's cheap to produce salmon over there, because the harbour, which is something like 7 or 8 or 10 times bigger than Sydney Harbour, has an interesting mixture of fresh water on top and seawater underneath. And because of this strange mixture of water, it means they don't have to worry so much about lice. They don't have to worry so much about diseases and so on. So it's actually cheap to produce the salmon over there, but only about 10% of the salmon that comes, Atlantic salmon, that comes out of Tasmania comes from those waters. So the lobby pressed the government to introduce to excise the industry. Which is strange, because
they probably wrote the legislation.
They probably wrote the legislation. It's interesting. This is an industry that says it is sustainable and nature friendly, and yet they have to be excised from the environmental laws so that they cannot be blamed for the damage that they're doing to a World Heritage listed part of Tasmania. I mean, it's so this is truly venal. And I was interested to hear, now I don't know if this is, it came from another party, but what Canberra's like, it's full of sort of, people, talk across the parties all the time. I was told that in a Labor caucus, the member for Franklin, my electorate, said, you are trading a safe Labor seat, Franklin, for a marginal seat, which you're not going to win, which is Braddon, which is on the other side. And this happened at exactly the same time that a huge disease that killed millions of salmon broke out in the southeast, my area, the area of Franklin. And we started getting fat globs of dead salmon and dead salmon flesh washing up on all our beaches in the middle of extraordinarily good weather. And the acknowledgement that the industry is dumping tons of antibiotics in feed into these open net pens. So of course it means that anybody catching fish, any wild fish anywhere near these pens, likely to end up catching fish with antibiotics in them and developing antibiotic resistance, of course. So these things have all come to a head at the one time, and in Franklin have caused enormous amount of anger. Wherever I go, particularly in areas where there's surfing beaches, swimming beaches, where there are recreational fishers, commercial fishers, anyone who loves the waterway, and Tasmanians use the waters a lot, is furious with this. They're furious with the industry for the disaster that they're causing. They're furious with the government for giving the industry a get-out-of-jail-free card. And you're right. JBS was fined $5.2 billion for bribing 1,800 politicians. Cook Aquaculture, which is the owner of the largest, the Canadians who own Tassal, the largest, they were banned from Washington State for the amount of damage that they did to the Puget Sound and for lying about their regulatory infringements. Cook Aquaculture is single-handedly responsible for the banning of all open net pen farms up the west coast of the United States. So we're not talking about genuinely, we're not talking about farming here, Benedict. We're talking about an industrial product that is dyed to make it pink, that is fed
and because otherwise
it's crustaceans. They eat the crustaceans.
Crustaceans, yeah.
And things like krill and so on.
Yes.
And that's what turns them pink. But because of what they're fed, which is sort of ground up chicken feathers and chicken bones and soy from the Amazon jungle and so on, because they're fed this sort of mixture, they would be an unpleasant grey if they weren't dyed pink. And the other thing is that, we have protected fur seals in Tasmania, but the industry is allowed to shoot them, usually using bean bags, which are lead-weighted bags, which can maim and kill, or underwater explosives, which they call crackers because they sound better. And if an employee says that they feel that they're being threatened, they're allowed to shoot them as well. And that's without talking about what happens, the loss of sea life from. At full capacity, the fish farms pump out 9 times the nutrient of the feces treated for the whole of the Tasmanian population. So this is putting out nitrogen nutrients 9 times the amount that the human population would put out if it was evacuating straight into our waterways. It's bizarre.
This comes down to multinational industrial untrammeled greed, then a PR campaign to make people feel good about, and there's some analogies I think to forestry in the sense that when I used to work on campaigning to protect old growth forests, it was very clear that when the industry became so big, whilst and in West Australia, the 1969 Wood Chipping Act was, I think, fairly fair dinkum about wood chipping the waste, because paper production became so big, all of a sudden it was just wood chip everything. Yep. But the industry became heavily mechanized because, again, these companies are growing bigger returns to shareholders, less employees. So, in fact, there's less jobs. And one would think with the industry in Tasmania that if it returned to a actually sustainable, smaller, decentralized business model, there would probably be more jobs than there is now.
We should address jobs. Jobs are important in Tassie.
Yeah.
And as I say to anybody, I was at a protest, asked to address a protest the other day, and there were about a dozen hecklers, and I went up and chatted to them later on.
Yep.
And, they're afraid for their jobs and they see us as an enemy. But the truth of the matter is, we have warming waters in Tasmania 4 times faster than the global average. The waters are already so warm that the salmon are basically stressed during summer and therefore much more vulnerable to the disease which is killing them at the moment. Secondly, these waters are warming so fast that within 5 to 7 years, this industry will no longer be profitable. Salmon just won't be able to be, no matter how hard they try to breed salmon that are going to be more or less susceptible to warming waters, they're never going to get there. Thirdly, if these companies weren't getting away with using our public waterways for less than $2 million a year when they're a 1 point something or other billion dollar a year industry, they could be encouraged, if not forced, to move out of the water and onto land, which is around the world about $4 billion has been invested in land-based fish farming. That's doable. That's if you're prepared to have industrial fish farming of any kind. Which would upskill fish farm workers would learn new skills because they'd become more technical. And the last point I want to make is that the government is already spending $38 million a year in subsidising the industry in Macquarie Harbour. That money could go to retraining and helping people develop small industries, small business. There are other ways of doing it. And Tasmania is desperately short of tradies. We need new chippies, we need plumbers, we need sparkies, we need builders, we need nursing, we need carers. There are so many other jobs which people could transition to. They're going to have to transition. We can't go on destroying the waterways. The waterways are getting too warm. The social license, something like 72 or 75, 77% of Tasmanians already feel that the fish farms should be out of our vulnerable waterways. We've had a primary industries minister saying that the industry has lost its social license. Things have got to change. We can't go on doing what we've always done in Tasmania, which is selling out the place, initially selling it out to something small and then allowing the whole thing to grow so big it becomes destructive. We can't keep doing that. And we certainly can't keep selling off our waterways to multi-billion-dollar multinational companies.
And then subsidising them to destroy them. I mean, it's absolutely unthinkable, unconscionable. And we can't forget that the Albanese government came in on this promise to reform and strengthen the EPBC Act.
Exactly.
So not only have they failed to honour that promise, but in this absolutely cowardly 11th hour way, they've decided to absolutely shaft the people of Tasmania. And I mean, it's extraordinary when you're north of 70% of people opposing and they just turn their nose up at democracy. I mean, it seems very un-Australian to me what they're doing, supporting these Canadian and Brazilian behemoth billionaire companies that are taking all of our Commonwealth and just making a huge amount of money that then they're siphoning overseas into apparently the pockets of Brazilian politicians to allow them to clear fell the Amazon. It's very disappointing, but very exciting that you're standing up to it. Right place, right time, I think.
I think it is. I think who can predict it?
Yeah.
But when I started out, I wouldn't have thought I'd say this, but I believe it is quite possible that we'll come down to a preference battle with Julie Collins.
And that's amazing. And who is the Liberal candidate and who is the Greens candidate? Is there a Jackie Lambie party candidate?
No, Jackie Lambie is not fielding any candidates in the lower house.
Yes.
They are. She of course is standing in the Senate again. So the Greens have got a very nice young man called Owen Fitzgerald, who was a leader of a lot of the school climate protests. Lovely bloke. He's a lot younger than me. I say that we're the sublime and the ridiculous. He's the sublimely young and I'm the ridiculously old. He's a lovely bloke. He's a local.
Yep.
He's well known. And I've said to him, I don't think I'm standing against you. I'm simply standing for, I'm just not a party person.
Yes.
Josh Garvin.
He might get the TikTok vote if he's that young.
Probably. Lovely bloke, very honest, very straight up and down. Josh Garvin is the Liberal Party candidate, about whom I know very little. I think he's in his early mid-20s. As far as I can tell, the Liberal Party's hardly contesting this election. They've allowed Labor just to sort of hold on to the seat for the last 17, 18 years and hardly bothered challenging it. And then it's interesting because the vote will be split with Liberals. There's a guy called Brendan Blomley, who is the mayor of Clarence, which is the eastern shore of Hobart, who resigned from the Liberal Party for a year or so back, who I gather is backed by Erica Betts, which is the right wing of the party. So I don't look. My feeling is that my belief is that we can, despite the fact that this electorate has got quite a strong Greens vote. I think that we can probably beat the Greens, but I don't know. I mean, it's all up in the air. I don't think the two Liberal-leaning, or the Liberal and the Liberal-leaning candidate, they've never really had much traction here. And One Nation, I met him the other day. Seems like a lovely man. But I've seen no advertising, no money going into it at all. So,
yeah. Well, that's very exciting. And so, did you say you've got the endorsement of Andrew Wilkie, or you're still working through that?
No, I've got the endorsement of Andrew Wilkie.
Amazing.
And we were in yesterday. We were in the the lottery draw for positions on the ballot paper.
Yes, I've been to one of them before. Very quaint process.
Yeah, very quaint. Andrew came bowling out and said, where did you go? What did you get? And I said, I got number 2. And Julie Collins, the Labour member, got 6.
Oh, brilliant.
She's at the very bottom of the ballot. He said, the fates are with us, Peter. I'm number 1 on the ballot paper. Yeah. They say that can be worth 1 or 2 points.
I think so. Absolutely. Yeah. The good old donkey vote coming into the ballot box. Can we just talk about very quickly, and we won't go too long over an hour, but just about the history of NOF, the Neighbours of Fish Farming, and your involvement there and how it's evolved and what it's doing at the moment.
Look, it started about 11 years ago. And I was the independent chair of a couple of meetings. They formed Neighbours of Fish Farming, and it struggled a little bit for a few months, and then I was asked if I'd take over and become the president. And we called ourselves Neighbours of Fish Farming because we actually saw ourselves as neighbours. We thought, naively, as it turned out, for a Four Corners reporter, the industry was not really interested in talking to us. They're quite interested in keeping us silent. It took me a year or two to realize that we were going nowhere. And the only way I can forgive myself for that is that Richard Flanagan, who wrote Toxic, the rotting underbelly of the Tasmanian salmon industry, he took 15 years of trying to talk to them to reduce their impact before he got around to writing his book.
Yes.
So we just decided we would be neighbours of fish farming because we could be good neighbours. It took about 2 years for me to realize that we needed to become the neighbors from hell. And,
yes.
And then what was fascinating was that the industry just closed down on us. And I think this is their biggest mistake because it's got worse since the multinationals took over. Because what they did was they formed this lobby group called Salmon Tasmania and just slammed the doors shut in our faces. And I think this is the biggest mistake they've made. If they'd come and talk to us, about really basic stuff like the noise and light that 24 hour a day, diesel generators and pumps and operating, that I know people who sleep with earmuffs on. I know people who go to the loo at night time and they don't need to turn the lights on in the house because there's so much light coming from the fish farms and the ships out there and so on. So once it became clear they were not interested in talking to us, and once it became clear that they would not share any information about the impact they were having on our marine life, then it became a sort of a job of slow investigation. Then Richard wrote Toxic. The industry wrote that off as just another article, having go at them. They didn't realize what a huge impact it would have. And we've gone from being a small community organization meeting once a month to the fact that we now raise enough money. We have a full-time campaigner. We support independent organizations in at least 6 parts of Tasmania. Each one of them, we provide the sort of the energy and the information that allows them all to operate. So we collaborate, and it's given us enough money to be able to take our logo, Eating Salmon, Killing Tasmania, to billboards across New South Wales, Queensland, and Melbourne. But it's a big ask. We're up against a behemoth, as you said. But the truth is that, people wake up eventually. And while I won't ever say that we have ever got one fish out of the water as a result of our actions, what we have done is we've ring-fenced the industry. It's now become virtually impossible to expand politically because of the groundswell of opinion.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. And it all comes back to consumer power, because just like democracy, people think as an individual, I can't make a difference, so there's no point. But if everyone went, oh, I'm not buying Tassie salmon anymore, that's you people viewing and listening.
And let me just say to you that if you're eating salmon today, if someone is eating salmon today, the odds are that it is diseased salmon. Disease is called Piscis rixatia. It's the disease which has killed more than a million salmon. But for one reason or another, the national laws for food safety have made a decision that it's not dangerous to. It's not apparently dangerous to human health. But hey, if you want to eat a diseased animal, go and make yourself a salmon steak tonight.
Yeah, and there's plenty of other options, and people should really read Toxic by Richard Flanagan. It's a fascinating book, and and definitely get into that. And people should also definitely, even if you're not in the electorate of Franklin, but especially if you are or you have friends or family there, you should check out petergeorgeforfranklin.com, and there's a lot of great information there, including the issues that you're campaigning on. I can see environment, forestry, honesty and openness, and then in terms of being a collaborative member of Parliament, and renters' rights and housing and all of the really important issues. And we can't forget that the reason that we're in a housing crisis is because the Uniparty, the two major parties, have done nothing for, 2 decades.
Absolutely right. It's the lack of what they've done rather than what they've done that actually bothers me most very often.
Yeah, absolutely. And they shouldn't be gifted the power that they're given as our employees, but that they take for granted and that they abuse. And just finally, with these horrid new laws that have been passed to completely contravene and breach the Albanese government's election promises from the last election, but then also destroying the very weak environmental protections we already had. Is there any hope, do you think, that if a minority government is elected in federal parliament, that these laws might be turned back?
I think so. If you remember, of course, it was Woodside that forced the West Australian government to lean on federal government to kill off a federal environmental protection agency. I am hoping, regardless of the outcome of our particular campaign, that there will be a sufficiently strong crossbench with Australia's future and Australia's natural heritage to be protected, that we can force whichever minority government, which I hope there will be, whichever minority government actually manages to win confidence and supply, to revoke that particular piece of legislation, because it will be used by other damaging industries, polluting industries, as they get out of jail free card as well. And we can't have that.
Yeah. We certainly need the younger generations of today to start mobilizing to protect the environment, because, we've all done it and it's an ongoing process, and the companies and the corporate interests you're up against are just relentless.
Yeah.
But it does involve everyone maintaining that vigilance, and otherwise we're just going to end up with zero biodiversity and a very diminished country.
And I've got 6 grandchildren, 4 children, 6 grandchildren. It might sound a bit cliched, but by God, I'm doing it for them.
Of course. And that's the strongest inspiration you can have. Thank you so much, Peter, for making the time.
Benedict.
It's lovely to get a taste of Tassie, even through the video, and wishing you all the very best. And hopefully we can talk again on the podcast on the other side when hopefully, fingers crossed, flippers crossed, you are the member for Franklin.
Fingers crossed. Come on down and we'll have a celebration.
Absolutely. No salmon in the celebration. Thank you
Thanks,
so much.
Benedict.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.